So that's started. Great. Sorry, just screen issue. So in terms of the content that we're sharing, we're hoping that nothing is too upsetting to anyone, but it's really important to practice self-care when we're having conversations like this, especially when we're talking about advocacy and barriers that people face. And Karen, you sort of mentioned that you've become cranky. That's a good thing, but I also appreciate that some of this is exhausting when you're living it day to day. So take time out if you need to. Happy to catch up with you afterwards as well, but just look after yourself and do what you need to do. And obviously we really appreciate already the presence that you're all giving to this, and I think it really it works best when everyone's engaged. So reduce your distractions, and if anyone needs to contact me if their screen, if your Teams shuts down, that's my mobile number there. So feel free to jot that down, and I might try and put it in the chat in a minute so that you can use that if you need to as well. So today's timing, we've pretty much already done our introductions part. We've got 2 sessions to get through, and each of them will be about an hour each. I suspect that might be difficult to keep within that time frame given the expertise and knowledge in the room, but we'll try and keep each session to an hour, and then we'll have a break in the middle of 20 minutes and then a wrap up. So we intend to aim at 1:30. And in terms of learning outcomes, so what we're hoping to teach you today is about what universal design is, why it's important, and how it can be applied in your role in local government. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Adam to take us into the first session.
Thanks, Virginia. Okay, so what we want to do is just take a bit of a step back today and look at the concept of design and the process of design. And the reason is that one of the things, for example, that became very apparent in the research I was doing when I was doing my PhD was that design is really at the heart of inclusion and exclusion. Design produces the things in the world that we interact with and engage with. So it was really a matter of going back and looking at who designs, who is being designed for. The fact that we're looking at design in the public realm rather than the private realm. So we'll make that distinction. Oh, sorry, can we go back?
Oh, sorry.
Universal design is both process and product. We'll look in this session at inclusion and exclusion by design, and also unconscious bias in design. So these are the sorts of topics that we'll cover in this session. So let's quickly just have a quick think about who designs. And I think it's quite interesting that, of course, over the past 100 years, design has been highly professionalized. It's people's profession. It's what they're paid to do. And so naturally they have a highly specialized skill set. But when we think about design, the issue is, of course, that everyone is interested in design. Everyone is affected by design, but not everybody thinks of themselves as a designer. So I'm interested to ask you, do you think of yourself as a designer of any sort? And if so, in what way? So I might quickly just ask a couple of people in the room to answer that. Michael, you might be the best to go first, because I think the answer for you is pretty clear.
Scully?
Yeah.
Beg your pardon. Yep, Scully.
I was just reflecting on some of the challenge and probably some of the outcomes here is that in the journey that is deliverable, planning, design takes us by the nature of the word sometimes further down the track too early, where people just think about design outcomes without actually taking a step back and then as a planner, understand you're doing the planning, because the design is just the means in which we achieve the outcomes. And I don't
Right.
think we spend enough time as planners or the project team. And, you know, it's just, in doing that, but I think we're getting better. Don't get me wrong. I think we're getting much better. There's always more to do, but I think even the word design takes people to a certain point in the journey too early. So that's probably the experience that I've had. When people aren't in there all the time, they're sort of taken there, as opposed to letting the process determine the outcome. So
no, that's great. And I think you've really touched on some of the complexity there of the design that leads to the outcome. And I think that's something we really want to unpick in this session, is distinguishing the design process from the outcome, and universal design as a process as much as it is an outcome. Yeah, thanks for that. Lyndall, do you see yourself as a designer?
Definitely. So I call myself a content designer.
Yep.
So I'm really interested in the way that visuals support information and help to simplify and bring content to life. I'm a really big believer in engagement as well. So I think that if content is really engaging, then people will interact with it. And so, yeah, I've my focus is from a design point of view in terms of content are simplicity and appeal. So I feel like that can really resonate with people, and then they will engage with the content more, and they'll either learn or use it as a decision-making tool, or, you know, whatever the purpose of the content is.
Right.
So I guess the other thing that I'm really interested in from a design point of view is working out who is it for, and I imagine that that's probably a big part of the other aspects of design that you're talking about as well, is and I know and obviously I'm hoping to learn more about how you do that in a universal way, but I'm quite interested in, because I'm coming from a content point of view, in particularly targeting different audiences.
Yeah, no, that's great. And sometimes we can make big assumptions in the design world about who the end user is going to be, and not always data-driven assumptions either. They're just, you know, and we'll unpack a bit more about where that comes from later too. All right, in the interest of time, sorry guys, we'll keep moving. But
just one thing on the image, Adam, we've got a picture up there for your benefit, Mike, of a guy with beard sitting at a computer desk looking cool. That's kind of the stereotypical idea of a designer. So we're just challenging that image.
Yeah, we are challenging that, because, but that is still how a lot of design happens, right? It kind of tends to happen in isolation. It's the designer's own creativity and interpretation of the brief that is often brought to life in isolation of end users as such, particularly in public realm design, which we'll talk about in a moment. Okay, I might go to the next slide, Virginia.
Sure. Let me just, oh, it has decided not to keep going. Here we go.
Right. So this is quite a busy slide, but we're just trying to demonstrate the depth of design and designers from a narrow definition, someone who helps design a specific product, object, or image, such as a building, a park, or a website. Examples of that are like architects, building designers, landscape designers, urban designers, website designers, graphic designers, etc., through to a more broad definition of someone who helps design a product, object, image, policy, processes, services, experiences, or information for public consumption. You know, when you look at that list, you think, oh, policy is policy designed, processes designed, services are designed, well, yes, they are all the product of design. So, for example, program design, project design, service design, policy design, user experience design, and events, design of events are all products of design. The point being that decisions are made in the process of developing the end product that are design decisions, essentially. So you can see that design does cover a lot of areas and a lot of interests as well. It's helpful for us to just make the point and the distinction that in this particular session, we're really talking about public realm design rather than private realm design. Private realm would be, you know, like building your own house, for example. Public realm, it would be like a streetscape or public facilities or an event, etc. So the reason we want to make this distinction is there's an interesting dynamic going on between these two. In the left-hand side, the private realm design, and there's a picture there of a house, a pretty standard looking suburban house. And on the right, there's a public realm design, which is a picture of a streetscape and various people walking through that streetscape. The reason we want to make this distinction is because in private realm design, there's a one-to-one relationship between the designer and the end user. So the end user can have a huge impact on that design. They can say, yes, I want this. No, I don't want that. I want it to look like this, and, you know, choose the overall function of, for example, a private dwelling. Within some limits, of course, the building regulations, etc. In public realm design, there's a bit of a proxy relationship going on. Local governments and governments in general do a lot of public realm design. And what's happening there is the people making the design decisions, the customer, if you like, and the designer, the customer is the local government, but they're not necessarily the end user. So they're representing the views of end users and the needs and desires of the end users, but they are not necessarily the end users. So there's this kind of proxy relationship going on in public realm design where the end users are actually at a bit of an arm's length from the design process. And that's there's good and bad in that, but that's where problems can arise. And the reason for that is when you ask the question, who are we designing for? We've got to ask the question in the public realm, who is the end user? Maybe, Virginia, you could just describe the image there for us.
Sure. So this is a collection of animated personas of different people sort of running left to right across the screen. So we've got someone that looks like they come from a Muslim or culturally diverse background, someone with a stick implying vision impairment, a couple with a pram, a woman who doesn't look like she has any sort of disability, but perhaps she might have a hearing impairment or a neurological disability. There's a family with some luggage in a trolley, so potentially tourists. There's someone with a rainbow sort of sash across their front implying LGBTI. There's a wheelchair user. There's a pregnant person. There's a couple who look a bit older and the man's got some crutches. There's someone with a delivery trolley and some boxes. And then there's an older couple as well. So sort of representing the diversity in our community and all different types of end users.
So when we talk about who are we designing for, if everyone is an end user, then shouldn't everyone's needs be reflected in the final design? So that's really a key point that underpins universal design, is that all of these people exist, all of this diversity exists in our community, and it is public design. It is designed for the public. So therefore, as much as to the greatest extent possible, what we design and what we produce in local government should be usable to the greatest extent by as many people as possible. Sorry, can we just go back a quick?
Oh, sorry, I'm rushing ahead.
That's all right. Just a quick question. In your experience, what are some ways certain end users experiencing exclusion in your community? So looking at some of these, is there any one image stands out to you that you know in your community people are experiencing exclusion?
Michael already talked about your like refugee settled people in South
you did.
Australia.
Yeah. Monica, any thoughts from you?
I mean, I think everyone's sort of in this space that we're in, we sort of know, the current experience. I think Virginia and I were speaking about, I'm not sure.
That's all right.
Michael Taggart, you've got your hand
Go
up.
ahead, Michael.
Thanks. Autistic people in their great diversity. We've got our Salisbury Community Hub is a combination of council officers, a library, community experience, customer-based centre, and so on, council chambers, public meeting rooms, all that sort of stuff. And many people say how wonderful it is, but the significant percentage of autistic people, they find it both in terms of light and sound and complexity of movement overwhelming and won't go there.
Yeah, that's a really great example. And I think it's interesting the various design challenges and opportunities that people who are neurodiverse have really presented over the last sort of 10, 15 years. It's become much more to the fore and something that I think a lot of people that are in the design realm have really tried to start to engage with and think about what does it mean to make something, a space or an event, sensory friendly. So yeah, no, that's a great example. Thank you. All right, we'll better keep moving. So a key point I think is that comes from the literature, and I haven't used references here, but these are not my ideas. These have come very much from research mainly by people with lived experience of disability themselves. But what researchers are arguing is that impaired people can become disabled by design, and marginalized people can become excluded by design. So it's an interesting concept that design can actually result in a greater experience of disability. So that relates to something called the social model of disability. The medical model, the traditional model of disability suggests that people experience disability is a medical issue. It's an individual issue that individuals need to resolve using their own resources. It's not something that needs to concern the greater society. The social model of disability emerged in the 1980s, and it tells us that people with disabilities are often more disabled by the physical and attitudinal barriers that they encounter in the community than by any impairments that they might personally experience. So it just kind of splits the concept of impairments and disability and says, yes, I have impairments, but actually a lot of my disability is produced by the physical and attitudinal barriers that I experience in the community. What that's meant really is that unfortunately it's taken some time for that social model of disability to permeate into the design world, and but it has now, and people are starting to really understand that local governments and governments in general have a responsibility to the community to apply universal design principles. And so I think we've reached a point now where intentional or unintentional, not designing to universal design principles, the end result is the same. Ignorance is no longer an excuse. And so therefore, we need to start thinking about inclusion as a design challenge and as a design opportunity. And that's part of the reason we're doing this this research is so that this training, so that people are not ignorant about what it is that they need to be doing and who it is that their designs need to represent. We know that historically, people have been excluded by, very much excluded by design, and that problems have arisen in public realm design because the diversity that exists within the community hasn't been properly represented in the design process. And that stems from 100 years of stigmatizing disability, for example, stigmatizing gender diversity, stigmatizing women, discriminating against people, excluding them. So, you know, for 100 years, close to 100 years, we locked away people with disabilities into institutions. And so they were out of sight, out of mind, and didn't need to be considered in public realm design because they just weren't visible. They weren't in the community and they had no voice. The images we can see here are a hand drawing a line between two groups of people, and one group says us and the other group says them. The hand represents the hand of design, and the us and them represents, I guess, attitudinal distinctions, attitudinal biases, that some people are us, those people are them, we're designing for us, not necessarily for them. So there's this kind of othering of disability, othering of diversity that has happened over generations that we're now trying to undo and see that everybody in the community is us. And of course, the result is of poor design, of design that excludes, is the image on the right, which is a woman with a pram, with a baby, struggling up a long flight of steps. There's some graffiti behind her. We can just see that design-wise, this image just reflects poor design, traditional design that doesn't take into account diverse needs, and in this case, the needs of women with babies and prams. All right, we'll keep going. So a lot of, designers are, of course, products of their own upbringing, products of society, products of what they see in the media. So as we all are. And we develop our values and assumptions based on our education system, what our parents taught us, what we were exposed to, what our workplace cultures are. There's lots of things that influence our values and assumptions about, in the design space, about end users. So assumptions made about end users that often go unchallenged in the public realm design are things like normal people don't have disabilities, vision impaired people cannot see anything. That's a bit of a dangerous assumption. Most people can read or read in English. People identify as either male or female. Children are primarily accompanied by their mothers, not their fathers. All people have a similar tolerance for light and sound. Places and spaces hold the same cultural significance for all community members. So these are often unspoken, unwritten assumptions, just a small number of them, that really can work their way into a design outcome, in that they don't accommodate for people who are vision impaired but still have some sight, people who can't read, gender diversity, etc., etc. So there's a real disconnect at times between perception and reality, because perception is so informed by values and assumptions. All right. Have I missed anything on that slide, Virginia?
No.
Okay, cool. We're moving through this pretty quickly. Does anybody have any comments on that last slide or thoughts before we move on? Oh, okay, cool. Our next slide is related. It's about unconscious bias. So as I was saying earlier, unconscious bias is expressed through design, and if left unchallenged, can become embedded as the expected norm or standard. So that unconscious bias, we all have it. We all are will grow up with, you know, with prejudices, with assumptions that we're sort of absorbed by osmosis, really, through our education system, through our cultural upbringing. However, the problem lays now in that if those unconscious biases are allowed to permeate into design, then there's a failure to implement universal design, which really can be considered a form of cultural prejudice and discrimination. At its worst, it is the worst form of privilege. Designers occupy a privileged position where they get to make all the decisions about what a product, an end product, should look like, how it should function, whose needs it should meet, and so on. So that is a very privileged position, and those unconscious biases need to be kept in check, essentially. And my last point on this particular, I guess, background context is competing priorities. The fact is that design in the public realm is a very competitive space. Michael would totally understand this. It's a contest of ideas, resources, priorities. So there is just competing priorities, competing decisions, competing design decisions happening all the time. You know, the concept of what does something cost, like a toilet block or a sporting facility, etc., is often based on what did it cost last time, you know, if we were to do like for like, rather than what would it cost to actually design this to meet everyone's needs. So it's a very contested space. And let me just bring up my notes, sorry, for this slide. Beg your pardon. Oh, yes. The other point I want to make in here is that urban spaces and places often reflect the values and priorities of those with decision-making power rather than the needs of the whole community. So the design of the urban landscape actually sends powerful signals about who has power and control here, and ultimately who belongs here in this space and who doesn't. So when you think of it that way, it's a really critical result that when the people who control the resources and are influenced by their own prejudices, and that goes unchecked, that we can end up with an urban landscape that tells a story that says you belong here and you don't. So that's sort of the background to why universal design is so important. We just go to the next slide. We'll have a bit of a discussion about a case study. So this case study comes from my hometown, Bunbury, and happened just towards the beginning of my research. And what's going on in this slide, there's two images. The one on the left is a Facebook post by the City of Bunbury in 2016. In it, there are three individuals pointing at a design of the new beachfront, Kumbana Bay beachfront development that was built over the subsequent couple of years. And the story says, great news this morning with an announcement that Lotterywest is providing $600,000 in funding for an accessible playground at Kumbana Bay Beach as part of the Transforming Bunbury's Waterfront project. The playground will be built in stage 1 of the waterfront project next year. The playground is still at the conceptual, but with funding now secured, it will be full steam ahead preparing a design. Designed to be fully accessible, it will also have a direct beach access, making it a fantastic new addition to Bunbury. Pictured are the City of Bunbury's James Shepherd, who was working on the design team, Bunbury MLA John Castrilli, and Bunbury Mayor Gary Brennan, who were on hand at the site this morning to make the announcement. So in the picture, Gary Brennan is pointing at the playground on the large design piece of paper that contains the design on it. So here we have an announcement that we're going to build an accessible playground, which is really exciting. It was advocated for by the community. And then we see the end product on the slide of the right. And what we have is a playground that has literally no accessible features in it whatsoever. There is sand everywhere, ladders to get up onto slides, swings that are not accessible, flying fox that's not accessible. Anyway, you get the picture. And in front of that playground, this is an image I took, there is a 10-year-old girl in a wheelchair looking back at the camera at the outskirts of the playground. She clearly can't play on that playground, even though she is a local resident. So I've got a question for you all, and this is really a discussion time. The question I have for you is, what went wrong in the process? So feel free to give me your feedback. What do you think went wrong in the process? And I'll just write down your answers and summarize them at the end. Anybody like to go first?
I would be happy to jump in.
Go ahead,
with
Linda.
a kind of slightly controversial. It's that pale, male and stale problem. And apologies to the men in the room. But there's a very, and yeah, so I'm really cautious about saying this because I feel like I'm stereotyping, but you know, these are people who are interested in development and progress, and you know, so I'm making a bunch of assumptions here, but I'm just wondering if the three people in the photograph had actually been more diverse, if we would have had potentially a more diverse outcome.
Right. Yes.
But
so there's a bit of a lack of lived experience of diversity there potentially in those people. And you're right, it is an assumption. But nonetheless, I think it's a question you can ask, you know, was there sufficient diversity within the decision making? Because these are not necessarily the people who are doing the design, these are the people making decisions about the fact that there's going to be an accessible playground on the beachfront. But yes, point taken, thank you. Aaron?
So I could actually say that something similar happened in the Mornington Peninsula Shire a few years ago. All excitement of an all abilities super duper playground at Rosebud Foreshore. The first time I went there in a wheelchair, I'm like, holy heck, this is not accessible for what abilities, and it was terribly designed. So it's not considering all users of the playground in the design process. It's I was actually surprised that Mornington Peninsula Shire did have a playground policy, and it did state that I think it's regional level parks should have elements of accessibility in it. I guess it's like, well, then what constitutes those elements? There's no predetermined guidelines about what an accessible playground might look like.
Great answer. Thank you. That's exactly what I was looking for. So you mentioned two key words, policy and guidelines. There's a lack of framework to ensure that a playground that's intended to be accessible is actually going to be that's going to be the outcome. So clearly there was some policy and guideline measures missing in the design process.
But the frustrating thing is that went checked throughout the whole entire life of the policy or the strategy, whatever it was, policy, whatever.
Strategy, yeah.
Yeah, so there's no, I guess, growth in understanding what design elements might constitute accessibility, like accessible for whom is another point. And
that's a good, very good point, because you'll notice that I think it would have been put to the design team, because the design was outsourced here, that we're looking for an inclusive playground, and you can see the colours of the towers in the background are Aboriginal flag colours. So there was a certain interpretation of what inclusion might mean that didn't include people with physical disabilities, but did include sort of cultural diversity. So that's interesting, a bit of a lost in translation thing that wasn't checked by policy guidelines or strategy.
And also defining terminology. So I've just been
Mm.
reviewing like some open space strategies and the intertwine or like no public spaces were accessible to the general public, and it's like what they mean by accessible is totally different to what we, the disabled community, mean by accessible. So having access to somewhere by the general public is not the same as having disability accessible elements as well. So it's
So
about,
there's something lost in translation there.
but it's also like how we interchange wording and stuff like inclusion. You're right, that like cultural inclusion, social inclusion, but design, physical inclusion and things like that. So it's how we bandy around terminology without actually necessarily having the framework for what that actually means in the guidelines. So.
Excellent answer. Thank you, Taryn. That's great. Michael Taggart, you've got your hand up.
Thanks. Two things, and they've been spoken of, just to expand them a little. The lack of beginning project inception to project completion engagement, a deliberate
Yes.
engagement of a diversity of end users, and travelling with that, I think a lot of that is sometimes quite difficult because people are expected to do it for free, and the people who get to participate are often inexperienced in design processes too. So the idea of capacity building for a diversity of people to participate effectively and to be certainly monetarily rewarded, but also rewarded with the respect of, feedback and acknowledgement, were missing probably.
Great answer. Yeah, not probably, they definitely were. There was definitely a lack of engagement of end users and a lack of capacity building to ensure that the end users, if they were engaged, were able to engage meaningfully in the design process. You can't assume that just because somebody has lived experience of disability or diversity, that means that they're going to be able to pick up a plan and have meaningful input into that process. That's a big leap into the design realm that takes time and capacity building. So yeah, great answer. Thank you very much.
Karen's just popped her hand up. Yeah.
Yep, Karen.
I'm not sure whether we'll be diving into this a bit later, but Michael made a really great point there, and also around the lived experience element. Like many people can only give their experience based on what their lived experience is, and they won't have all the knowledge and all the answers to the problems. And sometimes there's an unrealistic expectation that they're filling the knowledge gaps on the people that are actually paid to do the job, and it's like we get it wrong. Like we make mistakes in what we want, and I just feel like that there needs to be more conversations and more training and more points of view and experiences to really, create better design.
That's great. And that gets to the heart of co-design, which is something we'll touch on later in this course. But it's not something we're going into in any depth, but it's something we're planning on doing as a separate course down the track. What helps to make co-design work? What are some of the challenges, et cetera, et cetera? Lyndall?
I just wanted to say as well that it's sometimes, I'm just thinking about the group of men in the photograph again.
Yes.
And I'm just thinking like they're potentially very well-meaning.
Yes.
And that sometimes they feel like they're doing what the community wants. And I think that there's just a bit of a challenge around this kind of, bringing that unconscious bias and like an intention to make our community great. But well-meaning doesn't necessarily always mean inclusive.
Absolutely. So there is that kind of need for people who are involved in the design process to have some awareness raising, some training potentially in, you know, just general principles of universal design, for example, engagement of diverse communities, etc., or just awareness that there is this diversity in your community. But interestingly, of course, the intention was to build an accessible playground. So they kind of did get that bit, but didn't, it was definitely fell over in the process. But no, that's a good observation. Thank you. Michael, Scully?
I think Monica was next. And then
Oh, sorry, Monica, go ahead.
I was just going to add to that, very well-meaning. I feel like we see this often, particularly within my short time at the Shire, is that the assumed end users, say they were children or young families and teenagers. To me, I was like, wow, you know, some people would really enjoy this playground, but and they think that's good enough, that, oh, some people are satisfied, and it's sort of that louder voice and that privileged.
Yes.
They're in a privileged spot, but we can also see that as a reflection of, you know, even advisory committees to council, especially if people have been on them for a long time, they tend to put their preference first, but it is larger than that. So even with, I don't know, it was just more of a no,
it's a good point.
Yeah.
Because often, you know, even at the design briefing stage, you might identify, for example, oh, we want this to be diverse. We want to engage the Aboriginal community and ensure that this is a culturally friendly space for them, but then completely overlook all of these other groups who represent other types of diversity in the community. But they can still tick the box to say, yes, you know, we have universally designed this space as such, when in fact it's only just those whose voices are represented at the table on the day that are actually get their desires even considered. So yeah, that's a good point. Thank you, Monica. Michael, Scully?
Just very quickly, we'll move on, is that obviously that's a political photo opportunity, but if it was really driven by, you know, you would have potentially extended opportunities to the end users who are reflecting the philosophy to be in the photo. So it would just actually reinforce the fact that we are actually engaging, and, you know, if people don't want to be in it, that's fine, but it's as much about, for me, the intent. Now, we can't always deliver on the outcome, but the intent and genuine commitment to listen is as important than the outcome, because I know we can't always deliver on people's wants, move them up the needs to, you know, I always say to the team, you know, we have the must-haves, which is the legislative stuff. We have the wants, which is evidence-based and really reflects the, and then if we have $2 left overs, yeah, we can put the bells and whistles on it. And but perception is reality. I think we touched on that before. And even in this photo, unintentionally, I'm sure, but completely misreading the room, it's a missed opportunity. And a lot of the time, I think, what are we missing? You know, what represents a missed opportunity here? Because I'd rather, excuse me, have that discussion during the process than focus on a discussion around what lessons did we learn at the end. You know,
absolutely, yes.
You know what I mean? So it's around continual milestones, check-ins, being realistic, you know, setting up that narrative right up front, and
Right.
people will know they won't get everything, but at least we don't want to be in a position where people haven't had the opportunity to engage.
Yep. Absolutely. Great answers. Thank you. You know, that lack of representation, the importance of intent and genuine commitment to listen, the need for milestones, check-ins in the design process are some great points you've raised. So thank you, Michael. Lyndall?
Yeah, it's such an interesting discussion. I'm sure you want to move on.
I don't,
But
because it's my second last slide for this section, and
We're
the point
tracking
was
well.
that we would actually dwell on this
Yeah.
this
Well, yeah,
particular scenario.
there's a lot
Yeah.
to dwell on, but just Michael's comment there just made me wonder, and I don't know if there's an answer, but I just wanted to put it out there, like, what is the political value and you know, the political intent of like how can we encourage the political to embrace inclusion in terms of that visibility and representation, I guess. Does inclusion matter politically? I guess that's just a question that I'm putting out there. Because
Well,
clearly,
yes.
to me, in that photo, it just doesn't, and I guess there would be different political perspectives coming to play, but I wonder how much it matters at a community level compared to how much it matters at that political level.
It's a very interesting point, because through our journey in Bunbury has been very much a political journey. In 2014, the City of Bunbury declared or adopted the notion that it wants to become the most accessible regional city in Australia, which goes by the acronym of MARCIA. And that's what then later, that concept led to the funding for my research. But I was part of the Access Committee at the time, Access and Inclusion Committee, that came up with this idea. Hey, you know, how are we doing compared to other regional cities of a similar size to us in terms of access and inclusion? We think we're getting runs on the board. We think we're doing okay, but how do we know? There's no measures. There's nothing that tells us how we're performing compared to other regional cities of a similar size in these areas. So that nonetheless, the city loved the idea politically, I suppose, this catchphrase of let's become the most accessible regional city. But it was kind of done as a kind of more of a badge wearing exercise in the early stages than a genuine engagement in what would it actually take to become the most accessible regional city. And unfortunately too, there was it was being pushed as an agenda, if you like, advocated for would be a better way of saying it, by a particular councillor who was on that committee, who then had a political falling out with the mayor, who's in this picture here. And so it became a bit of a political football thing, which was completely unhelpful for the whole intention of what we were trying to do, and threatened to derail the whole thing. So politics is really, really important, and keeping it on the political agenda, keeping it politically neutral is very challenging at times. Yeah. Thanks, Lyndall. Michael? Kelly?
Yeah, just to that point, and I'll be real quick. I think in terms of gaining momentum, and certainly my experience in the last sort of 5-10 years is that when whole of council commit to a aspirational blue sky goal, that's when you really see significant funding, significant commitment. The two things that spring to mind, similar to what you were saying in terms of those aspirations, wasn't an aspiration, was that the declaration of a climate emergency. And if I can reflect on just how many more things we have to do as part of policy and statements in terms of considering climate change. ESD is literally through everything we do now. The other element that probably isn't as obvious is towards zero, in terms of, you know, zero deaths and injuries on the roads. So once council buy into that premise, it just opens up so many more opportunities. Now, I would, you know, you would hope that those achieve or determining some aspirational thing opens up innovation and initiatives. You don't want it to be in the back end of a poor experience. You want to try and set the goalposts in a more positive way. So maybe that's a way that we advocate, where we try to achieve those things that you said, Michael, and Adam, in terms of benchmarking and whatever else. And, you know, I hate the word minimum standards. It's a baseline standard, you know, for me.
Yep.
Because minimum doesn't necessarily articulate what we're trying to do. You know, it's the minimum, and then what can we do better than, you know, and we talked to that around all those things. So they're two examples where I've seen significant changes through the whole organisation, through the elected representatives at a local government level, right through to officers.
Great. And look, this vision of Mast here becoming the most accessible regional city in Australia did for a time give us that sense of focus, that sense of unity. It did unlock some resources. And ultimately, it actually did lead to the endorsement of the recommendations from my research and strategies that were then implemented in the city towards where we're at today in terms of our design processes and outcomes. But it was very challenging. But yes, having that uniting vision or that uniting goal and leadership from the top makes a huge difference, as you see in other areas too. Karen, and then we'll be just about ready for a break. Go ahead, Karen.
It's just more of a comment, because I was curious, because I noticed that was a Facebook post that you've shared there about within there. So I Googled on Facebook, and I hope that one comment was, I hope this will be disability inclusive as well. And there was a City of Bunbury reply, yes, it will, keep an eye out for the designs. And I'm like, what went wrong with the designs? Like, is that part of the process problems too? It's like, as a disabled person, sometimes you're really overwhelmed with everything that people want feedback from, and you think, oh God, I just haven't got the bandwidth to do this. Hopefully someone else will do it, or what. But again, and it's also around who are the loudest voices around that table, and what, again, like as we've stated, like when you don't have design guidelines, when people don't actually know what inclusive means, what they're, you know, like Michael talked about minimum standards, and it's like also the old school of the way things we've always done things, like the Liberty Swing is the old school thing. There's some people that have tried to incorporate it in a bit more of a modern environment by not having necessarily the fences around it, but then you've got the H&S.
That's a good example we'll cover later, actually, Karen.
Okay, yes, okay.
Yep.
Yeah, but it's like, as you said, that the intent was always there to have a disability inclusive space, and obviously it got lost.
And intention is what's clear here is that intention is not enough. That the design process needs safeguards to be embedded into the process that ensure that intention is translated into reality, because clearly here it wasn't. That all of the safeguards were missing from this whole process. So that was what those safeguards are, is what, you know, my research tried to look at, and what other people like Virginia and others are all trying to understand. What are those process safeguards that need to be embedded to make sure that we get a consistent outcome and that the intention is translated to reality. And I think the big challenge for us design-wise right now is not that we're always getting it wrong, but that we're not always getting it right. And so, you know, things can be overlooked, things can be missed because there aren't enough safeguards in the design process. There's a lot of great outcomes happening in our communities, but it's just that consistency that can often be missing in the process and going back over the same ground over and over again. All right, so last slide for this section, universal design as process and product. So in our next session, we're going to be talking about the early stages of trying to define universal design. And a lot of those definitions you'll notice are around the end product. What does a universally designed end product look like? How can people use it, etc., interact with it? But I think what's equally important, as we've just discussed, is the process. The process is just as important as the product. And so universal design is about both the product and the process by which it is achieved. It is about inclusive design processes as much as the products that include, and it is about embedding universal design principles and safeguards into all design systems and processes. Hold on, I think I had a couple more points from the slide, did I? If we, we focus on both the design process and the product, because if people with specific needs are left out of the design process, there's a high chance that the product will end up excluding them, whether intentionally or not. So I think that is the end of this session. Virginia, is that right? Are we on time?
Yeah. We were just going to recap what we've covered.
Thanks. Yeah. You want to do that bit?
Yeah, I can do that. So just wrapping up, we've talked about design, and we've been focusing on design in the public realm as opposed to the private realm in houses. Adam just mentioned again, we're talking about universal design as process and product. And we're talking about how people can be either included or excluded by design, and unpacking that a little bit more. So that was a great conversation. And then just the importance of considering values and unconscious bias in the decision-making process, and exploring that, a bit more deeply. And rather than just sort of jumping into the process of design first, we wanted to make sure that we spent some time talking about those underpinning values and assumptions, because we think that that's a really important conversation to have. Yeah, so in the next session, sorry, I have to refer to my notes. As Adam said, we'll be talking a bit more about the policies, about the principles and goals that have led to universal design being a concept, and also a few things around standards. So we'll give you 20 minutes now to go and have something to eat, have a little break. So for us in the East, we'll be back by 12:10. Michael, I believe it's about 11:20 over there. So if we see you at 11:40, and Adam at 9:10.
Hey, great.
Cool.
Thanks, everyone. See you then.
Thank you. Yeah.
Michael, it's Adam here. Your name was so familiar to me. I was trying to think, where do I know that name? And then I remembered I used to work with a guy with the same name, but it wasn't you, obviously. Like, oh, I was racking my brain thinking, where do I know that name?
That would have been in Western Australia.
Yeah, he ended up moving to New Zealand, actually.
Oh, right.
Running an organisation over there. Yeah.
It's interesting. I only became my name when our first child was on the way. We didn't want to give him a hyphenated name, and my wife liked my bachelor name less than I liked her maiden name. So,
oh, that's very interesting.
It worked out very well. Yeah,
that's good. That's good. Yeah. What was your original surname?
Topley, Topley.
Okay, that's unusual.
Yeah, Welsh, I think, or something like that. Some variant or anglicisation of.
Yep. And Karen, you've got an interesting surname too. Is it German?
It is, but like about 5th or 6th generation Australian, so we've got no German culture within our family at all. So we probably even say it wrong. So apparently it's Fun Kulzer, or I don't know, like I just.
Okay. How do you say it?
Fankhauser.
Yeah.
With one R, because lots of people want to call it Frankhauser.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
I have done that on the DAC minutes before. I think I had to pull myself up. Sorry, is anyone else having torrential rain in the Victoria area? We now have a leaking roof in our bathroom, so that's good.
No.
Oh no.
Oh,
are you at home, Mon?
Yeah. It's fine.
Yeah.
Wow.
Very annoying.
Yeah, it did come down really heavily here as well about half an hour ago.
I think from everywhere from middle of Tasmania up to central west New South Wales had heavy falls during the forecast this morning.
Yeah. We were expecting a thunderstorm overnight though, which didn't eventuate.
At least it wasn't a repeat of that storm that you had the other day, Virginia, that knocked that tree down.
Touch wood, there's no more massive trees on my property to come down.
It came. Oh, heavens.
Yeah, 2 o'clock in the morning. I happened to look out the window at exactly that moment as well, and it just huge tree. Luckily it didn't hit, I mean, it got the edge of the balcony, but not the actual property.
Yeah.
Actually, Adam, I've just seen you a message. I'm just having trouble sharing and seeing my notes on the screen and not seeing you. So if I stop sharing and you share your version, Adam, that might.
You want me to share? Yeah, no problem. Give me a moment.
That would be great. And then I can see what I'm doing. This is the figuring out that you're having to put up with from us. So thanks for bearing with it. So we've got everybody back. I might get started then. Oh, sorry, as soon as you change your screen.
You can go ahead. Just give me a moment to, but you might as well keep talking. That's fine.
So without the slides, I'll just say that we're going to talk about definitions, principles and goals of universal design, which some of you might have heard about before, but we're just looking at them sort of slightly differently, and that's an evolutionary process, I guess. And then we're going to have a discussion about the difference between specialised, universal and standard design, which is a division that we've kind of made for conversation, but it brings out some good thoughts around what's specialised and what's universal and when we might need both of those things. And then just having a discussion about compliance and minimum standards. So if you just go on to the next, keep going onto the definition, I think. Yeah, great. So most of you will probably be familiar with the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability. They actually have a definition of universal design, which I think is quite good. And that is that universal design is the design of products, environments, programs and services to be usable by all people to the greatest extent possible. So that's kind of implying that any product or environment should be usable by all people, which in theory is great, but we're going to also talk about sometimes when there might be need for specialised design. But yeah, as Australia is a signatory to the United Nations Conventions of the Rights of Persons with Disability, and the convention looks at disability, and this has already been mentioned in the discussion this morning, being a natural part of human diversity and humanity, rather than something that we should sort of separate and think of as other. So next slide, Adam.
Virginia, sorry, can I just
Yeah,
add to
go
this?
for it.
I think what I like about this is the recognition that universal design is a global challenge. It's not just something we're dealing with here at a local level. I mean, what we're doing at the local level is giving, is the realization of what's happening at a global level at the United Nations. So this is, and mirroring it is the urbanization of the move to urbanization. More than 50% of the world's population now lives in cities, and it's the design of those cities that is providing the opportunity to realize universal design for more people.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Just added that to our notes. Seeing it happening in process. So yeah, the principles, which Michael, I think you spoke about the development before, and I'd love to hear more about that from you either today or another time or both, your understanding. But they were developed by Ron Mase, who was an architect at North Carolina State University with colleagues, and they were really developed as product engineers and architects to look at the built environment and products. So they were applied to a lot of different physical outcomes, I suppose you could say. And my understanding is they were coming across things like missing, no curb ramps on footpaths and inaccessible doors and features that we've come to think of now as standard in our designs. And some of the things that they advocated for have even become built into building codes and standards. So they were really at the forefront of demanding equitable access. Whoops, we've got multiple
Sorry, guys.
visions of ourselves there.
I was trying to just make that screen slightly bigger, but then it just ended up
duplicating us all.
Oops.
It's fine.
Sorry. Oh dear. Okay, let's try and get back to where I was. There we go.
No, that's all good. So yeah, there's a website which has got some really good explanations and the way that these principles can be used as a guide, either to evaluate existing buildings or products, but also in developing new ones. So the Irish Centre for Excellence in Universal Design, they produce a lot of really great resources and guides and standards that are used internationally as well as in Ireland, and they still refer back to the principles. And so, yeah, they're still important in the context of universal design, but there've also been some sort of evolutions. But if we could go to the next slide, Adam, there's a couple of pictures that are examples of the outcomes or the products that these 7 principles sort of led to, which is automatic sliding doors, which you see everywhere. And I notice, places like shopping centres and chemists, it's just a given that the automatic doors are there and that there's, easy access in and out, because they want as many people to come through the doors and shop as possible. So they understand it from an economic perspective. Curb cuts and tactile ground surface indicators are in there, and also audible crossing signals at lights in cities where you have the crossing lights. Things like that were advocated for partly because of safety reasons. If you could imagine not being able to cross the road and get up onto the footpath on the other side, that would be very dangerous and scary. So they were sort of starting at a what I imagine to be a basic level, but they developed a lot of innovations and advocated for change that we now take for granted in a lot of the different standards that we see. The evolution of that, I'll swift swap that around to the next slide, Adam. And it doesn't really matter if this one comes first or second, but I suppose beyond the basic access requirements and from a sort of safety and practicality perspective, we're then moving more into a well-being and social integration. And the next slide is going to be about the 8 goals of universal design that were developed in 2012. That do talk about wellness and social integration. So we've got examples here in the pictures of a roundabout and a playground that allows wheelchair users and anybody else to be in the same piece of play equipment. We've got accessible beach matting, which Monica knows all about, and Karen, that allows anybody to cross the sand down to the water's edge on beaches. So I think that's a great example of universal design. And we've got an accessible barbecue there. So all of these are sort of wheelchair examples, but I suppose sometimes they're the easiest visual to show. And the point being, if you could go to the next slide, Adam, is to kind of just represent the shift that the universal design, the goals have gone to. I'm just going to go to my notes because I think your version doesn't have my updates in it. So,
oh, it doesn't it? Oh, sorry.
No, that's okay. Yeah. So I'm just going to read off my notes. So the 8 goals expand on and attempt to clarify the 7 principles, including having social, cultural, health and wellbeing outcomes, and a more occupational focus on things like body fit, awareness and comfort. And they emphasize the importance of balancing form and function. And Karen and I, we've talked about this a lot. Design solutions need to be aesthetically pleasing as well as functional. So you see that quite a lot in accessible design or attempts to include people with disabilities, but they're often not to the same grade or quality or aesthetic value, which is not what we want and doesn't have to be that way. Another interesting thing that they've added in the 8 goals is personalisation. And so we've sort of talked about, Adam and I have had a lot of discussion about how that fits into universal design and that previous definition from the United Nations Convention around it being, usable by the greatest number of people possible versus a personalized or specialized design. It's about the outcome that you're trying to achieve, which is inclusion, or they've used the term social integration in their goals. So the examples that we came up with there are things like changing places, which are targeted at a small end user group, but enable people that need them to participate in the community just like everybody else. So another example is hearing loops or alternative formats. And again, these are things that some of them might have just had one end user in mind, but actually once we've started using them, a little bit like the beach matting, we've found that they benefit a whole lot of different users. So what we've talked about as well is the overlap of different end users and products that start to fulfill even needs that we might not have known. And I use in the communication space the Easy Read version of policies and documents as an example, because that's something that is designed for people with maybe low literacy who need a different format, even a video about a document. But they're great for everybody because you get a snapshot and you get a sense of what the document's about without having to read the whole thing. So sometimes these specialized or modified designs might have one end user in mind, but then they actually become something that everybody benefits from. So I think there's a lot of different ways of coming at universal design, and specialization is definitely a part of that. So the next slide, Karen, you talked about the Liberty Swings earlier, which is a good example, I suppose, of something that was designed as a specialised design for wheelchair users to be able to have a piece of equipment in a playground that they can use. And some people love them, some people hate them. We're not necessarily making a value judgment about them here, but they do often have a big fence around them. They stand out. They're kind of still in that space, lend it to sort of being something that's exclusive or just for the people with disability. Whereas what we're seeing more of are pieces of equipment, a bit like the roundabout on the previous slide, and there's a picture here of a big sort of seesaw that allows a whole lot of people to get on it and sit together, including wheelchair users, so that you have a playground equipment that's fun for everybody to get on and use together, rather than something that's separate and segregated. So we see this evolution from like the principles to the goals to whatever might come next as a design challenge and an opportunity. And it's really exciting once you start thinking this way, to think that there's so many things that are yet to be universally designed. Like, I just think it's an area that has got so much scope to open up and be more creative and more innovative, to make sure that we really are taking on board a broader range of end users' needs. And I've seen that in my own work, you know, when we've worked with the Disability Advisory Committee to come up with new ideas for like a picnic table or something in a building. And we've come up with some really cool ideas and innovations that benefit everybody, not just the people that are sitting in our advisory committees. So yeah, I guess it's just having that open mind, and that sometimes specialization is needed to produce that end result of everybody being able to use public spaces, and sometimes specialization even becomes something that everybody benefits from and uses. So I think if we go to the next slide, this is a Venn diagram that has 3 circles, and on the left is minimum standards, on the right is specialized design, and at the bottom is universal design, and they all overlap. So minimum standards we're going to talk about in a little while, but yeah, they're things that are in the building code that have to be done, and traditionally they've been developed with an average user in mind. And to your point earlier, Lyndall, that average user, it's not just speculative. It was very much designed around middle class white men, sort of in the 50s and 60s, and maybe white women if you were using a domestic appliance, but pretty much built around a certain type of functionality that they were assumed would fit most people. And then specialized design is what we spoke about just before, where you might need something specific to an end user. And then universal design is trying to come up with products or processes and products that benefit as many people as possible. So they all overlap, and sometimes there's a need for one, such as assistive technology that a person might need just for themselves. And Michael, you talked about screen readers and other assistive technology that you use. So it's unlikely, if you don't have a vision impairment, you're probably not going to make use of that technology, but it allows you to work in the workplace the same as everybody else. So yeah, we just wanted to open up a discussion around the difference between specialized design and universal design, and sort of unpacking the value in the whole spectrum, I suppose, and understanding that it's not just a black and white, this is universally designed or this is something else. So Adam, I don't know if you want to add a bit more to this conversation before we go into a little activity.
Yeah, just I think it's very interesting how universal design tends to borrow heavily from specialized design that has been designed for specific cohorts. It often starts there, like the Liberty Swing, for example. You start there and go, well, how can we make this actually look more, or how can we make this function for more people and make it more inclusive? I'll never forget actually turning up to Mandurah, which is just about an hour north of me. They had a playground there, and I hopped out of my car and I had kids in tow. and we were parked right between the big playground on the left that was just full of kids. It was alive, it was buzzing. And then on the right, there was a Liberty swing with a cage around it and a crow sitting on it, and there was no one in it, and there was a sort of gap between the two, you know. And I thought, oh, that's not the answer. That's not the solution. It certainly is a step towards in the right direction. And very often these sort of specialized design solutions in the public design space, public domain, are a step towards hopefully something more universally designed down the track. The other interesting example is on our beachfront there, Kambana Bay, that we were talking about earlier. They failed to make to put in gender neutral or family change rooms. So they've got a male change room, they've got a female change room, and in the middle they've got an accessible toilet that is actually used enormously, not by so much by people with disabilities, but by families with kids, you know, where you've got a dad with a daughter or a mum with a son. They're just at that certain age. You don't want to take them into the women's change rooms. You don't want, or the male change rooms. And so, guess what? The accessible toilet gets used as a family change room all the time. And so it's sort of beginning to move from specialized design into universal design when you start to observe those sorts of behaviors and think, well, maybe we can create spaces that draw on specialized principles, but actually create a more universal outcome. So yeah, that's just a couple of examples to get the thoughts flowing.
Michael, you popped something in the chat as well. Do you want to, Michael Taggart, do you want to speak to that? Your guidelines and the adaptive design? It's the same sort of thing, just a different term, isn't it?
It is. It's just a specialised design that Adam was talking about. I would actually say, as a person who's supposed to be one of the chief beneficiaries of it, that tactile ground surface indicators are specialised design. And with a bit of thought, the use of, and some more research, you know, they were developed literally 41 years ago here in Adelaide. No research has gone into surface treatment, horizontal, you know, plane surface treatments for outdoor spaces. Crazy.
Yeah.
So I just think it's good to name it. And when we say that universal design is very little extra cost, then that seems to be questioned by things like TGSIs. But I just refuse to accept it as universal design. It's where we've got to at the moment.
Good example. Were you going to say something, Virginia?
I was just going to question. So you refuse to accept the adapt. What do you refuse to accept, Michael?
I refuse to accept that tactile ground surface indicators are universal design. They're adaptive design.
But they allow for vision impaired people to have the same experience. So in that sense,
absolutely,
it's an interesting conversation.
It's on a continuum, but it's not useful for many other people. In fact, they're damn uncomfortable if you're using a wheelchair, mobility scooter, pram, or whatever else.
We were actually talking about this the other day. We're trying to get our own heads around the distinction between adaptive or specialized design and universal design. And yes, TGSIs, we actually talked about them, and I thought, well, how, you know, wouldn't it be interesting to do an exercise where we talk about and think about how tactile indicators could actually be made useful to other cohorts instead of a single cohort? And that's where we started to think about universal design as design for multiple cohorts rather than one single cohort. So yeah, we're still playing with that.
Did you want to add to that?
Yeah, so I've been in a committee meeting where there's been a conversation around how wheelchair users often use the TGSIs for the wayfinding. So sometimes you're coming to a crossing and you're not quite sure where the curb cut is, and so you look out for the. So
that's interesting.
I've actually used that before, because also if you're crossing a road that's not even, it's like, well, where's the other side of that curb cut, and you look out for that. There's the light up hazard indicators at the curb cuts that in Melbourne that are green and red, and
I've
that's
seen those. Yeah.
Yeah,
What
because
is the concept behind them?
we're always looking at our phones, not looking up these days, and so but also and there's another conversation around signage, which is a bit separate. But as a wheelchair user, I look down a lot more than I look up sometimes because you don't want to be running over people's feet.
Yeah.
And so, and you can't often see over people to see, you know, the change in traffic lights. So sometimes you're just looking down and you like noticing it. And also when you're in the city and the traffic's loud and your auditory processing is a bit confused by all the noises, like you're thinking, oh, that's ticking and I'm going to go, and it's like, oh, hang on a minute, that's for the other side of the road that you're doing. So when you've got those markers on the footpath, that's kind of like a secondary sort of backup thing. So there's but
Ones that illuminate.
so they're really good. So I agree that there hasn't been a lot of progress, and the progress that they try to make. So where I'm living at the moment, they trialed metal directional indicators, and they just like pop out of the concrete like there's no tomorrow, and they become a tripping hazard and stuff. So I think that there needs to be a lot more research into the design of TGSS, you know, to get them
those TGSs.
so they become a bit more usable and friendly, because they do disintegrate when they're the rubber ones and stuff like that. And yeah, you're right, like there's some users that find them a hazard and some that actually like them. And we've had also conversations around trying to use ground surfaces as a means to highlight a change in things, rather like the natural environment as a means of directional wayfinding as well. But people that use a cane or sight, they kind of find that some of the rough surfaces make it difficult for them to negotiate that. So yeah, it's all a balance, isn't it, of trying to make it workable for the most amount of people as possible and safe.
Karen, I think that what you've touched on, can I just quickly say, the wayfinding. I know City of Bunbury at one point was paying a consultant to come down and talk to us and do assessments of wayfinding and walkability in the City of Bunbury. And I think that's where the specialised design of tactile indicators potentially overlaps with a universally designed solution that provides better wayfinding for more cohorts of people in the community, or everyone potentially. I mean, if you're following, say, certain lines and you know they're going to take you to a public toilet or to a certain space, you know, there's a lot of potential benefits and design improvements that could be made to make that happen.
Yeah. Good discussion. So to facilitate this thinking a little bit more, we've got an activity, and we haven't tried this out with users before, but we're going to try and split you into two groups and use a Miro board. So I know people will have varying degrees of familiarization with using Miros. So Adam, while I'm talking, could I maybe ask you to put Michael Taggart and Lyndall into one group? And then Michael, Karen and Monica into the other group. And we've got this little activity. I might just share my screen. Oops. Have we lost you? No, you're in. I've sent a link there. We've got the 3 circles. Before you hit go, just let me know, Adam.
No worries. At the moment, I can't find the breakout room option. I don't seem to have it, so you might need to do it. Sorry.
That's okay. So we can do it together as a group if you like. But in theory, it'll be small group discussions. So I've got the same circles. Can everyone see my Miro board except for Michael T? I'll describe it. Up the top, I've got 3 overlapping circles that say minimum, standard, specialized design, and universal design. And then below, I've got some post-it note labels that have got a range of different design outcomes or products that you find in the public realm that I'm going to ask you to group into those 3 areas, or whether they're in an overlapping area. So I can read them out, or if you want to have a go at dragging, you just click on one of the post-it notes and you can drag it up to the circle. But it might be worth having a conversation about a few of them, just because we've put some interesting ones in there. And the purpose of this is really just to get you thinking around the difference between those different types of design. So the first one we've got is gender neutral toilets. That's a nice untricky one. Do we think that's a universal design or a specialized design or a minimum standard? Feel free to either unmute and we can do duplicates if we think it belongs in lots of different places.
I say universal design.
Yeah. Anyone got a different thought on that? Yep.
Depending on the NCC, maybe
it could become a minimum standard. Yeah, so we'll nudge it towards the minimum standard edge of universal design. What about Braille signage?
That's specialised design, I would imagine.
Everyone agree?
Mm.
Yeah.
Yep.
What about a urinal?
Yeah, that's specialist.
You're on mute,
that was
Michael.
interesting. It's funny you say that, because you know there's a lot. If you were to put these on a spectrum, you would say that minimum standard is kind of a form of specialized design on the left side and specialized design on the right side, and it's in the middle bit where you're reaching the most number of people. But I think a urinal would be generally considered minimum standard in most toilet block designs.
Yeah, even with a view that they're getting phased out.
Oh, are they really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Which is a really interesting discussion, because in some ways providing urinals allows men to use the toilet a lot faster and therefore get through the queue a lot faster.
What are we going to do?
I think
now?
it's all,
Michael, you're going to have to do something about this.
It's all contextual, because the lower level of provision and service, you want to broaden the ability to do that. But when you've got a high level of provision, you have greater opportunity to do exactly what you said, have male, female, and urinals, for, as Virginia said, to have that quick turnaround. But it's certainly something that it isn't as not obvious, but it isn't as, you know, you got to think about it a little bit more as just not a minimum standard these days, because not to say it's not there, but yeah, it's not as an obvious input.
Yeah. So shall I go through a few more? We've probably already talked about quite a lot of them, so I'll try and choose. What about an elevator? A lift?
We know that comes under minimum standards for the most part, but where it's not required, maybe it's universal design. So.
Yeah. And even what we found with one of our buildings on the peninsula is that the minimum standard for a lift wasn't actually big enough to fit an ambulance stretcher into. So when you're thinking about it from an all users perspective, I think it might just comfortably fit a wheelchair user and another person, but maybe not 2 wheelchair users. So yeah, considering whether the minimum standard actually reaches the needs of all possible users, well, not maybe not all possible, but as many possible users. I'll do one more. What about wide paths?
How wide, Virginia?
Good question. Yeah. So that, yeah, I'm glad you asked because I think again the minimum standard here is 1.5 meters. And we've suggested in our pedestrian access strategy that it be 1.8 because that allows 2 wheelchairs or 2 prams to pass each other or to walk alongside each other. So yeah, again, some of these need a bit more unpacking and a bit more discussion. I think the purpose is to show you though that things fall into a number of different categories, and even if we do have something that we think of as a standard design, it can become, it might not meet all the needs of universal design, or that universal design can enhance a standard design to make it better. Okay, so does anyone want to?
Accessible, you know, Virginia, the one that's really interesting to me is the accessible parking bay.
Yep.
And the accessible toilet. Mainly because I've often thought, you know, if you start talking about universally designing accessible parking bays, you're potentially going to upset people, because those parking bays, Karen, you might want to speak to this, but if you're going to have other cohorts using the accessible parking bays in a more universally designed manner, that might be where, you know, and the same might be said for changing places. You know, if other cohorts were allowed to use that, then it starts to diminish the value for people that really need that as priority. So that's a bit of a tricky space, and worth maybe a little discussion as well.
Yeah, Michael, you've got your hand up. Did you want to?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple of approaches to this, and it applies, I think, to play spaces as much as parking areas and so on. Is universal design the provision of a uniform but large number of uniform, say, parking spaces that everyone can use? Or is universal design providing a number of different kinds of parking spaces with, you know, good signage and connection and stuff like that? Ones that are great for SUVs, one for really mini cars or electric cars, or seniors as users of cars, or people with prams, or people with rear loading wheelchairs. You know, you know, so one is universal design. Is it uniformity or a managed diversity?
I think we're seeing that in shopping centres, where the smart ones, and even a local aquatic centre, we have spots for families with prams, we have spots for seniors. There's so many more promotion of spots, and I think for the most part you're never going to eliminate people who might be of the targeted group, but I think most people respect the intent. And I think in terms of moving that community consciousness, I think that's definitely a big step, you know, forward. The other thing, just in terms of, we're currently updating our public toilet strategy for the Shire, and one of the first things we realised, and we wanted to change the narrative, is that we wanted to change the name of the strategy to a public amenity strategy, because the previous document only focused on the actual toilet block, where if you're thinking around public amenity, it is around all those other components that make up the amenity, which is the footpath, the car parks, the washdown, depending on the location and what we call character area, appropriate wayfind signage, all of that. So we're deliberately changing the language to talk about public amenity to reflect the
More than just the toilet block.
more than just the toilet block, yeah.
Mm.
Because it's like, you know, if we're having a strategy position, not a policy position, but a position where the first amenity would be an all access cubicle, but if you didn't provide the pathway and it didn't lead to a car park, well then, you know, what's the point? You've got to look at the whole, step back and apply a
Yeah.
broader lens. So yeah, obviously that's where the cost is, but there's different ways to get to a point. But, you know, that's where the commitment, and hopefully we get broader recognition that amenity is a greater recognition of the community and
service.
user experience, not just the asset as
Right.
the building.
That's great.
That's
Michael.
great. That is really good.
Mon, did you have?
I guess it just sort of goes back to universal design to me is also a universal experience, and then having these even parking bays as creating equity. So it's always going to be difficult to get to the beach, whether you're, you know, a woman who with 3 young children, or you're a wheelchair user, but having, you know, the accessible park for that wheelchair user, or a parents with pram a little bit closer to the beach, it's still going to require an amount of effort. But that creating a level of equity with those sort of, it's interesting that it's just a universal. The outcome is universal experience for all, instead of so that design process creates a universal experience. I don't know. It's still a process,
right.
and I'm still
No,
getting my head
that's
around
exactly
it.
what
And
we
I'm
wanted
so are we.
you
So
to
are
do.
we.
Yeah.
I noticed at my local hospital, they've started putting in low mobility bays. And I thought that was interesting because the accessible bays don't always need to be close to the door. That's a bit of an assumption. That it's more important that they're level, that they're wide, than they need to be close to something. Whereas for other people with low mobility, maybe being close is the priority. So it's really about being able to get in and understand the different cohorts' needs and start to design something as using Michael Taggart's terminology there, that is about managed diversity than about uniformity. So yeah, I like that a lot.
Michael? Excellent.
Thank you. Yeah, I think the example of public amenity, something I think you said, Michael, was you know, you're looking at a bigger cost envelope, because we're not just looking at a standalone asset, but actually the opportunity cost of having a standalone asset that a part of the population can't use because there is no amenity provision to get to it, has to be taken into account too. So it's not just a negative cost. There is a opportunity cost that is being
absolutely
lost.
Yeah. And I think the other part of that is to clearly articulate that through community benefit. So there is rather than seeing it as a cost, it is an investment. So it's turning that there is a financial cost, yes, in isolation, but the broader community benefit is an investment in achieving what we all know to be social, environmental, blah, blah, blah. So the reality is, though, that the bean counters will see the dollars, have a heart attack, and then come back. So, yeah.
But Michael, this is interesting, because are you starting to see a shift in perception and expectation about what it costs to build certain facilities, because now they're starting to include all of these other features, so that people don't have unrealistic expectations about what, for example, a replacement cost might be?
We have we're exploring different methodologies now in terms of design and construction, rather than just plain construction. We're looking at modular buildings.
Right.
But in
To
saying that, I
offset
mean,
some of that additional cost, you mean?
yeah, maybe it's not as significant as what some people might think. You know, it used to be quite in terms of, you know, bringing prefabbed things to site and saving of time, but you know, the out of the ground solutions are, you know, the gap isn't as significant these days, so you've got to weigh up life expectancy of the building versus
Sure.
whatever else. So as Michael said, there's a lot of things to explore. So I think, but I think, yeah, it is that community benefit and looking at and changing that narrative, as I've said before, and people just really realising that when you're talking about an experience, yeah, and unfortunately for us, I hate to say it, but we do have most of our buildings, because we're also doing a community facility strategy, and a lot of our existing stock is nearing the end of its useful life. So the ability to simply renew is not cost effective. You know, it's a band-aid solution to a bigger problem of we actually do need to replace buildings.
Yeah, one of the things we found with the city of Bunbury was there was a bit of a culture of like for like, replacing like for like, and costing that like for like. But that like for like, we're talking about a 30, 40-year-old design that doesn't meet community expectations anymore at all, and probably never did. So that was an interesting challenge I found at the city of Bunbury, was trying to help people to shift away from that thinking that automatic, we're just going to replace like for like, rather than really engaging with what a more suitable facility would be that meets today's expectations. But I think most local governments are reaching that point now where they're realizing that the replacement of facilities is an opportunity to create better accessibility and better inclusion.
Yeah. Karen, you've had your hand up for a little while.
Oh, no, it's fine. I was just going to answer the question around whether or not accessible toilets seen as specialist design, or whether or not they move towards universal design. Just relaying back to Adam's example of there being no gender neutral baby change tables or family change rooms, and the accessible ones being utilised as that. That for me is problematic. There are fewer options out there for people with disabilities to use the bathroom, and then if that's been taken over by parents and like there's created a mess or whatever, like then we're left without a bathroom, or we're left waiting longer for a bathroom. It's like, well, why can't people just get over themselves and have gender neutral, you know, family change areas and stuff, you know? So and also talking about the like for like, and Michael would be like, as someone who now needs a change in places toilet, and it being really targeted as where I can go, and like having to do detours all over the place and thinking about what I'm going to drink where and whatever, it is the strategy to always replace a toilet amenity with another amenity, or is it, do we reduce the amount of facilities that we have? And that's not something that sits comfortably with residents and things like that. Like they feel like you're taking away their rights to not only that, but playgrounds as well. It's like, do we have fewer that are built better and help more people, or do we, you know, just keep building the same old infrastructure over and over?
Yeah, I can say that what I've started to learn in my journey is that, which was unexpected, and I'm not saying it was an unexpected outcome so far. I'm not saying, I don't know how it's translating, but sometimes when you're actually looking at potentially an oversupply of cubicles, and if you then realign that to the identified needs and strategies or needs of the community and cohorts, you might reduce the amount of cubicles, but end up with a better outcome.
Mm.
And I never thought that going in. Back to this whole point of just simply renewing and whatever else. So if you think about it and take a step back and go in with a non-prejudiced view initially, you might actually end up with a better outcome with a broader range of use, but even you might end up with one less toilet. Could be an example there. So that was something that certainly doesn't represent the norm, but there are small elements where that could be an outcome. So, because there are certainly elements of oversupply through the initial investigation that we've done. Where that is going to ultimately land, I don't know, but yeah, it was certainly something that, as we've gone through this initial investigation, is that, you know, we could achieve a better outcome, but not necessarily maintaining the same amount of cubicles. It's how we use them better and how we present them better. So
And it's
that's
a good
been an
point
interesting.
that you make, Karen, because we sort of go, oh, there's a handful of changing places across the peninsula or across the city. That's enough. Like, you can find your way to them. But then when you start saying that you're going to take away all the other public toilets, everyone's outraged because we need them everywhere. So yeah, I think your perspective is one that we all need to consider and yeah, be realistic about. Quality versus quantity, isn't it? Adam, would you mind sharing your slides again, please?
No problem.
If we can go from, I think I'll just quickly touch on 31. We're tracking, yeah. I guess Adam and I don't propose to have all the answers, and this is why we want to generate this discussion, because it's very much about cultivating a thought process and an engagement process, which some people might find frustrating. They just want to know the measurements and how long to build things. But what we're trying to encourage here is for people to pause and think a little bit more deeply about what we're doing and why we're doing it, and thinking about that outcome, like you said, Mon. It's a really good insight, and I think that's where we wanted to sort of get you to, is that, oh, what is universal design? What specialized design? What are we trying to achieve through all of this? So look, I'm not going to spend much on this slide. It's something that most of you know, but it's just the legislative context in Australia underneath the United Nations Convention. We've obviously got the Disability Discrimination Act that Michael's spoken about, and interesting to hear that there used to be roles associated with implementing that after 1992. And then there's the Disability Strategy for Australia, which lasts 10 years, and out of that come all the state and territory disability action plans. Then we've got the NDIS that's based around services and supports, which local government doesn't really get too involved with, but I think that everyone has a role to play in ensuring that the broader community is inclusive and welcoming. And again, this is a focus on disability, and we're going to talk in next week's session a bit more about other population groups. But I suppose because Adam and I have this experience and universal design has come from a sort of disability-led push, this is where most of the legislation that speaks about universal design currently is. And the Royal Commission into Violence, Abuse, Neglect and Exploitation of People with Disability highlighted in so many ways the needs for better universal design across a whole lot of different sectors. So I just wanted to context that for the next bit of the discussion, which is going to talk about the Disability Discrimination Act at a high level. Adam, could you go to the next slide, please? Often I hear people saying that something is DDA compliant, and I think that it gets used as a proxy for accessible or inclusive, or that we're adhering to what we need to do to achieve a good outcome. And so I just wanted to sort of clarify. So the Disability Discrimination Act does include things like the access to premises standards and disability standards, amongst other things. At its highest level, it says that it makes it, the DDA makes it against the law for public places to be inaccessible to people with disability. It's not prescriptive in the Act as to how that has to be achieved, but that's the basic premise of the Act, is say it's against the law for people with disability not to be allowed to access public places. If we could go to the next slide, Adam. So with the standards, we've got a range of Australian standards that you have to pay about $200 each for. So they cover things like AS 1428.1 is the design for access and mobility. And then there's sort of enhanced standards more recently. There's requirements for children and adolescents with physical disabilities. There's 1428.4, which is for people with vision impairment, and the TGSIs, the tactile ground surface indicators that we were talking about. And there's a communication standard for people who are deaf or hearing impaired around hearing loops being installed in public places. So they cover the minimum standards, and there's a link there which we'll be providing people if they want to go and find out more about them. I think as council, don't know, do you have the same thing in South Australia and WA that we get access to them under our peak body through the MAV in Victoria? You don't get that,
Possibly.
Michael?
I don't know.
Adam, you don't know? Okay. I guess that's one good thing about working for local government. You do get access to those standards, but for everybody else, and Karen, I think you did the access consulting course, you had to pay for them yourself. Lyndall, you've got a question there or a comment?
Oh, yeah, I just don't understand what you mean by saying you have to pay for them. So like, how are they used? Like, sorry, if that's someone who's not in council, what do you mean?
So they set out the minimum, like the size of an accessible toilet, the width of a hallway, the ramp gradient, all of those sort of design specifications are contained in these standards. And if you want to be compliant with them, you have to have access to them, which means a subscription base or a pay fee for accessing the actual standards.
So, and is that per facility or per?
No, the standards are generic and then they get applied in different public facilities.
So you're paying for access to a document, not for someone to check or something like that?
To the document, that's right.
Okay. So, and is that expensive? Like, does that? Yeah. Okay. That's what I.
Our council has subscriptions to, I don't know, 30 or 40 or 50 standards.
And that's $200 per year.
A go. No, well, a year license. Yeah.
They get updated. I don't know, not that regularly. But so I think, I'm not sure if anyone knows better than I do, but yeah, they do get updated. I don't think it's an annual. I think you pay. No. You pay for the document, but then when it gets updated, you have to pay for the new one.
That's right. Yeah, it wouldn't be annual for most of them. No. Some it is.
But I guess, yeah, my point one being that there's a cost to get that information, and the second one, which is on the next slide, they're minimum standards. So yes, we do need to comply with them to meet the legislation, and that's important. But they don't ensure equity of access for all of the diverse users in our community. And there's this great quote that I found in the city of Ryde. They had a development control plan up in New South Wales, which says the provision for access for people with disabilities in the Building Code of Australia, which is where those standards come from, the provisions don't meet the requirements of the Disability Discrimination Act. So there's a gap between the standards that are minimum and the Act, which requires that we don't discriminate and deny access to people with disabilities. Karen, do you want to explain that better?
It's no longer acceptable to just say, oh, we met the code, the requirements of the code, etc., all the standards. because people can still bring a
complaint or
complaint. So there was the Sunshine Coast Hospital, I think, most recent thing. It was a brand new hospital, and they were asked to do a lot of retrofitting of more accessible features because someone brought a complaint against them, and yet they'd met the building code. So yeah,
Certainly a good example.
Yeah.
Michael, did you have? Sorry, Karen, have you finished?
No, I forgot what I was going to say.
Oh. Yeah, you were good. Yeah, so I guess you will get this. Oh yeah, Michael, you did have something to say. Oh no, we're muted again. No, okay.
Michael, we can't hear you, mate.
Unmuted, thank you.
There we go.
Sorry. Yeah, only some of those standards are mandated under the National Construction Code, like AS 1428(1), but the, as far as I understand it, Part 2, Part 3 are not. And they are what we've got in our guidelines for universal design is sort of 3 layers. I mean, obviously, if it's mandated in law, there's no choice. But that's very limited areas. Second, if there's an Australian standard not mandated by law, then we should implement that. And then thirdly, we look at better than that is actually thinking universally, not just in narrow channels that the standards focus on.
Yes.
Yeah, like that statement that you shared with us.
Mm.
And they also don't apply to things like playgrounds or events or other equipment in public spaces. So yeah, the things that they apply to are very narrow as well. Karen, did you want to add to that?
I just remember an example. So the new metro tunnel things, they're starting to open them up. They had an open day recently for the public, and the signage, it meets standards, but because the areas are so vast and the signs are so high, people can't read them because the writing is too small to be far away. So again, like meeting minimum standards doesn't equate with functionality and usability.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess whilst we're not teaching you about the code, because that's definitely not my area of expertise and I'm not interested in getting into those details, I think it's important that people that do this course understand that when they're saying it's DDA compliant or that it's meeting the requirements of the building code, that's not actually good enough, and that discounts a whole lot of people from potentially being able to use that facility or that service that's being designed.
In my experience, particularly in the smaller, sort of local governments, there can become this kind of because they're struggling with resources and time and staffing and so on. It just becomes about meeting minimum standards. What are the minimum standards we've got that we need to meet? And that's it. We don't have time or money for anything else. And that's the unfortunate byproduct of having minimum standards. They're a really important safeguard against, as opposed to not having them. But the unfortunate byproduct is that they feed a bit of a compliance culture within a lot of local governments, where it's like, well, look, if it's not in the regulations, then it's all just an optional extra. And we're not into optional extras because we don't have the money or even the interest. So yeah, it sometimes you're fighting against compliance culture. But it's good to have the language of universal design, because that helps people to think outside that compliance box somewhat.
Did you want to say something?
I just sort of wanted to add to that some of the discussions I've had quite recently regarding, because some areas of the Shire find the standards and making things so compliant, just compliant minimum standards is too hard, and it's too much, that, is it better to have something there that may assist you know, what would from a universal design aspect, say, I'll use an example, and this is a real life example, so don't go back to my bosses, sorry. Sorry, Scully. So there's a car park, the sign came down, at an accessible car park. The sign came down at a gravel beach, but they won't put the sign back in due to it not being a compliant
Wow.
park, accessible park, but a lot of people rely on that sign. So there's almost this other side of compliance being a reason that we won't do it at all. So I just sort of wanted your sort of thoughts on whether yeah, what do we do with that situation, I suppose? Is it better to have something that may, you know, help a group of people, or is compliance key? Like it's a really tricky space.
That's such a good example. And a really tricky one. I don't know.
Good.
Karen,
so if you could solve that for me,
not
that'd
to
be
answer
great.
that, but
no, but it is that discussion, and I think it just feeds into this too hard mentality. It's too hard to even get the minimum standards. How could we do you know, what's necessary for community?
Universal design.
Yeah.
Maybe that word adaptive that you've used, Michael, in your guidelines. I'm not endorsing that we don't aim for an accessible parking space, but you know, in some situations, especially if you know that gravel car park's never going to be anything but a gravel car park, we need to be able to adapt to that. That would be my thoughts. Karen, did you want to say something?
Oh yeah, I was talking on mute, and I'm like, oh, you're talking. I gave up on the course. Like I just couldn't deal with it all. It was just
the
too,
Access consulting course.
Yeah. Like I discovered, like you, like I just couldn't deal with all the measurements and all that. It just wasn't where I wanted to go. I wasn't in the right headspace to complete it, and I just put it aside as a exercise in. I've discovered now that I don't want to do that. But also, like, it did give me a bit of insight too around the type of people that do the course and whether or not it has much impact on outcomes necessarily and things like that. So, you know, I've got that perspective of it. My point to Monica is that I think I agree with you in that people are too afraid to put it back up because people say it's not compliant. But having said that, there's been no major works done on it in order to make it, and in order for it to have to meet that. So I would consider it to be still a grandfathered style thing. And yeah, so I think that, yeah, you've identified a barrier to inclusion all right there because people are afraid to not meet the standards. I will say that the new standard for the accessible car parking is so controversial and often confusing for the cohort that may be using it. So where there's no bollard on the yellow striped hazard, or I don't know what they call it, but no standing thing, people think that that's an area that they can just sneak in and park in. Other people think that they don't realise that they can use it as a way to get out from their car, so they park into the non-accessible so the non-accessible car space next to it or something. And
right,
yeah, like they're really confused about how to use the car parks. And you see a lot of user groups thinking, why don't they just go back to the wider car spaces?
right.
But I understand that where space is a premium, they're trying to reduce the amount of space you need to utilise more car parks by having that central bit between two, perhaps. But yeah, so it's confusing for many people. I'm getting back to your point around Disabilities Discrimination Act and people saying DDA compliant. It actually shows that they don't actually know what they're talking about. So yeah, and then in those situations, you know, you could say, what do you mean by DDA compliant? Or do you mean it meets with what standard or what building code rather than DDA compliant, because that's the misnomer. So
yeah. I think that I'm keen to have more of those conversations to just unpack those assumptions around what people actually mean when they say that, because it's used as a bit of a blanket. Yes, we're doing everything the right way, but then when you look at what's actually compliant and what compliance requires and how minimum that is, it's very little that they're actually needing to comply with. Yeah, so look, we've got a lot more to talk about, and this is our last sort of information slide for today's session. It's really just summing up the conversation that we've been having. So I'll just read through the dot points for everyone. So we're talking about how universal design is an approach to creating spaces, products and services rather than a fixed set of rules or minimum standards. It's about incorporating equity, inclusion and engagement from the very beginning of a project throughout its development. The purpose of universal design is to create solutions that work well for all users. So when we say that, without excluding or stigmatizing any group, so sometimes universal design overlaps with specialized design and or standard design. But it, like you said earlier on, it's about creating an equitable outcome. So I hope that hasn't confused everybody. We've sort of brought in this extra element of specialized design and equitable outcomes. But I think in Adam's and my development of this course, we've had a lot of in-depth conversations, haven't we, about what do we actually mean by this thing, or how do we explain that concept in a way that's understandable, and do we even understand what that means ourselves? So we've tried to separate a little bit out some of these different assumptions and terms, and I'm not too precious about terminology. Some people are, and I know that things like accessibility gets used as a coverall, and that's okay as long as there's a shared understanding of what we mean by that term in that context. And it's the same as, Michael using adaptive. We've chosen the word specialized. There's a lot of different words that have similar meanings. I think the most important thing is creating a shared understanding with the people that you're working with. It would be great if we just said one thing and everyone knew exactly what we meant. That's not always going to be the case. So I think these conversations and discussions and unpacking what we're talking about are really, really important to have. Adam, did you want to add anything else before we do a wrap up for today?
Yeah, just that. I mean, the conversations we've had today reflect the complexity of what we're talking about. It's not such a cut and dried thing. There's a lot of grey areas. There's a lot that needs to be worked through. It's just probably unhelpful when language gets confused, when terms like accessible get substituted for universal design, or universal design is used as the same interchangeably with accessible, because they're actually two different things. And so that's why we've tried to separate them out. What exactly do we mean by universal design versus specialized design, for example? And also understanding that a lot of what we've been talking about in this session is about a universally designed product as opposed to a universal design process. And so hopefully one thing that is a takeaway from today is that universal design is about both the process and the product. And if we invest in the process, then the product should follow. It's that process of design is going on every single day. Decisions about design are being made every single day at the desks of people with the responsibility to design things. And so the question is, if we want universal design to happen, how do we influence those decisions? How do we become involved? How do we get people with diverse needs involved in that process to ensure that whatever the end product ends up looking like, it's going to be universally accessible, inclusive, because the process had integrity, the process involved people with lots of diverse needs to ensure that the product would result. Yeah, so.
Great. So we might skip to the next. I think we've so wrapping up, in this session, we've talked about definitions, we've talked about the principles and goals of universal design, and a little bit about how things have evolved and are still evolving. We've sort of unpacked specialized versus universal versus standard design, and still more to be considered in there. And we've talked about compliance and going beyond compliance to achieve universal design. So next week, we will be talking, just the next slide, Adam, we'll be talking about embedding universal design and a number of different ways to do that. And then we'll actually be having a practice at doing it using something that a few people will be familiar with, but maybe not everybody, which is an equity impact assessment. So that approach is being used in Victoria under the term gender impact assessments, but some councils have broadened it to equity impact assessments, and we've modified a version of that slightly to sort of simplify it for an activity that we'll do next week. But that's the end of week 1, and we're 5 minutes early. So yay. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I just want to thank everybody for being so engaged and interactive in today's content. It's been really fantastic, and the sort of breadth of experience and knowledge of what people have been able to bring to the conversation has been really good. From lived experience to technical proficiency and knowledge. We've had everything in between, and even I've learnt a few things today and got some ideas from the discussion. So it's very much a mutual learning experience, I think, and that's what I enjoy most. So yeah, thanks, guys.
So I don't know if anyone wants to give us, I don't want to put anybody on the spot. So if you want to go away and think about it, that's fine. If you want to give us some reflections now, great. Or if you want to wait till the end of next week, that's fine as well.
Thank you for having me. It's been fascinating. I've learned so much, and I've really loved listening to all the different experiences that everyone's brought. So I was thinking I would like to follow up in an email or something like that, if that's okay.
Yeah,
that'd be great.
Yeah, no problem.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Lyndall. See you.
See ya.
Take care.
I know.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, bye. Anyone else?
I
Sorry,
just want to
Michael?
say, did you want to go, Michael? Taggart?
I'm here still.
Yep, we're all here except Lyndall.
Okay, fine.
Monica?
I just wanted to say thank you so much. I've learned a lot, and I think I was so deep in thought that I didn't have any answers to questions, but now so I felt a bit out of my depth. But I've a couple of questions. If you were to do this within a broader group, would you be sharing slides or like your presentation? Would you share them before or after the presentation?
I like to share them. We haven't quite discussed that yet, but I think sending things out ahead of time is good to give everybody a chance to review them beforehand, or a version of the slides, like maybe a PDF.
Yeah.
Overview.
And maybe even I liked the three questions you had right at the beginning. I'll put this all in an email, but the 3 questions was fabulous at the start. Just thinking where you could utilize this information the best. But yeah, I have heaps of notes for myself because I've had so much learnings within this short amount of time. So yeah, I can't thank you both enough for inviting me along, and I know how hard you've both worked on it too. So really impressive, really amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's great.
We get a lot more into the meaty stuff next week, actually. So yeah, hopefully we'll get a lot from that too.
Yeah.
So congratulations to you both. From a presentation point of view, well paced, gave people the opportunity to expand when the topics were of interest. You brought us back to them on brought us back online when you needed to keep pace. I'm really interested to explore further Michael's approach on that 3-tiered approach to the going through the minefield of standards and compliance and DDA stuff. I think that's really where people get unintentionally stuck. And if we can work together as a group to give someone people really simple templates and tools as a follow-up on that, and case studies or whatever that is, where other people have utilised that, that'd be fantastic. So I'd be eager to, Michael, if you could to share that, with the group, because that I think, as I said, a lot of this is unintentional in terms of where we go down the rabbit holes, but certainly the last part of what we spoke about was that, DDA compliance and what we should do when, my simple terms is very much Joe Public is the must have, need to have, nice to have. That's how I frame everything up. But when we get down to a little bit more technical stuff, and when we start applying it in that space, it actually frees up. I think those things aren't restrictions, they actually free up thinking. So that's what I sort of felt. I didn't see it as a restriction. I saw it as, okay, well, this is where I can actually be more broad in my thinking. It's not necessarily a restriction. Yeah, sure, if I need to meet legislation, that's fine. That's the easy part of the process, So anyway, congratulations. That was great.
Thanks,
I better head off too.
Thanks, Colin. Yeah,
Okay.
appreciate that. Cheers.
See you later.
We're losing one by one. That's good. Karen or Michael, did you want to add anything at this point? Oh, you've muted yourself.
Oh.
Yep, there we
Sorry.
go.
I was unmuted. Yeah. Yeah. I think I had a lot of hopes of this session because for a number of reasons. I think we're at a time when this sort of learning is needed. I'm really hopeful that if the various governments, especially federal governments, keep pushing their disability strategies, that the need to fill in the gaps between general, things should be accessible for everybody, and what do we do next, will become a demand. And from what I've experienced this morning, this is going to meet that demand.
Oh, great.
I've done, my history is I've done some of Joe Manton's and others courses, Access Institute, General Universal Design. We actually, City of Salisbury paid Joe and one of the trainers to come across and stay for a week and a bit.
Oh, wow.
And do 1 and 2 day courses with our staff and some other councils too. And a bit later, brought her back to talk to our senior management team about what is universal design. And while that was good, I wished what they'd received was, although that was only 2 hours, but still, yours wasn't really a lot longer than that. I wish they'd received what I've heard today.
That's great.
So,
sounds like we're on the right track then with that. And I'll be really interested to, once we've presented next week's content too, to see whether you feel that that's rounded out the discussion and provided enough substance that people can actually work with
application.
that.
I'm just thinking about some of the, those 4 or 5 questions you asked us to have a think about. I've got a couple of notes. Can I give them now, or not?
Like.
Well, no, I'll pop them into an email to Virginia. But it's not so much a comment there, but a question about audiences. Now, I know in my council, the groups that I would most want to participate in at least this first part of your webinar today are our urban planners,
Mm.
or strategic planners, whatever you might want to call them.
Mhm.
We've got a $2 billion project of urban redevelopment in the Salisbury City Centre, so a public-private partnership over the next 5 years, 7 years, something like that. And the strategic development project team who manage that, and their collaborators in our infrastructure design and delivery area, a couple other adjacent areas, they really need this. I can't get it anywhere else. What we're doing this week, next week, is urban and regional planning solutions, which is, I'm not sure what your equivalents are in your respective states, but they're one of our leading consultants for strategic planning for councils in this state. And they work on disability access and inclusion plans a little too, predominantly with us. But they also deliver what's called Universal Design in the Public Realm, a 5-hour course, which includes quite a lot of practical stuff. So it'll be a 1 hour or 45-minute move around a building, and another one in the outdoor area where our urban redevelopment project is going to be. So to try and bring home the high level to the specific in the environment where people will hopefully be applying their knowledge. So I think that's well worth being aware of, and I'll be interested to see what comes across in terms of content, but I don't think it's going to be what I thought of. The primary positive today was to get us to unpack our thinking and try and then apply it in different sorts of ways. I don't think the ERPS course will do that. I may be wrong. I think it'll be a bit more of a given. This is what it is, this is what it isn't. How do you apply it to this situation? What you've done is actually made us a bit clearer, because we're really struggling with our elected members, for example, who variously talk about inclusive design as being the same and some as being different to accessible design, to universal design. And we don't, as a staff and as an administration, have a clear messaging framework back to them.
That's
so
good.
It leads to potential confusion and political
and assumptions that you're all
and
talking about the same thing.
The same thing when we're actually not. Yeah. So I thought if your audience, that's the primary audience I want. But I think there are other audiences. And after, I'll have some things to say about that after I've seen next week. But that first audience I talked about are people who are really keen about LGBTIQA+, who are really keen about how to make our city work for its various age groups and its various cultures, especially the newer arrival cultures.
They're already on board with a lot of that.
Yeah, so that would be very valuable to have. I just think it's really important to.
That speaks to. Sorry. Go ahead. Sorry. Finish what you're saying.
Yeah, this is the last thing. Important to know what do we do with, and how important for this course are those who come from a compliance mindset. So I'm thinking of our city infrastructure department, not all sections of it, but much of it, where DDA compliance means the National Construction Code. And for all our efforts at doing mandatory 3-hour disability inclusion awareness workshops, where we try and push the fact that that actually is only a tiny part of the whole, by itself it's not enough to get people to rethink. So I'll have a couple of suggestions about that. But that is the tough audience, because it's one thing when you're learning something it's another thing when you're unlearning before you start
Yeah.
learning.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I just think that's worth reflecting on for that sort of audience that does the in-close technical stuff that Karen hates, the metrics and all the certainties of life and stuff, which in the end exclude rather than include.
Yeah. Yeah, but they're people with a particular mindset and a particular goal that they want to achieve in a time frame. And so, yeah, some
We've
of
got to
this
get them
stuff,
on board because
Yeah.
they're there. They're doing some of this stuff. And
and
that's why
I think we
process is
definitely had them
important.
in mind when we were developing this, but
Good.
maybe we might need to tailor it slightly depending on whether people are already converts or if we're trying to bring them along with
that's
us.
right.
Yeah, I think they're
And
good
you made me
points.
think too that we could target a course like this specifically to people who are on access committees or diversity committees who are trying to find their voice or find more traction, getting them sort
that
of,
would be great
I guess, that
too.
kind of empowering and education role.
Giving them a bit
So
of
yeah, we
a
could definitely think
foundation
about
to
that.
stand on. Yeah.
Yeah.
How many people
Yeah.
do you figure would do a course? Our group of 8, I mean, well, obviously we're not representative of a random group you might collect when you advertise, but we seem to have enough time for people to develop
we were
thoughts.
thinking around 12 would be maximum.
Sounds good. Yeah.
12, 15 at most, depending on whether they were, like if they were all from the same organisation, it might be easier to have a couple more. But yeah, you wouldn't want the group to be too big.
No. Okay. Look, thank you. That was wonderful.
Thanks,
Right.
Michael. Awesome.
Especially with the demise of CUDA in time.
I know. Yeah.
Which has devastated me. I mean, I think what you're offering is going to be almost CUDA 2. It's not the same thing, obviously, but in terms of giving people some equipment to actually go about the business of universal design in the public realm, you're the next thing.
Well, we did meet with Jane about 6 months ago to let her know that we were doing this, and she was happy to hear that. And then when we got the email about winding up CUDA, I wrote back to her, and so she's been very supportive of what we're doing as well. She's been such a great champion. If it wasn't for her, I don't think I don't know about you, Adam, but I wouldn't have known about universal design without Jane.
I've learned a lot through CUDA, absolutely, and it's so much work they put into getting those newsletters out and the information. It's going to leave a real hole in the
I still go back and read ones from years ago.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, right.
Because there's still people around in our organisation that need to hear some of this stuff, who weren't around at that time. Yeah. Oh, damn, there was one thing that just flashed past me. Sorry. It wasn't... am I keeping somebody else from talking, or is it just the 3 of us?
Karen.
Karen. Sorry, Karen.
No, you keep going. I'm actually fascinated and learning from you as well. So
I just wanted to ask Adam. I am absolutely committed, and there's a number of us at Salisbury who want to have a universal design panel of residents.
Yes.
And use them like we use our architects panel or whatever, and to have some more thinking about that. I mean, I've got initial ideas, that you'd actually have some basic requirements that people would have to meet, like doing this course, for example, being willing to do this course, for which they'd be paid, but also that they'd have a role in community connection with other people in their networks, and so they wouldn't just be their voice, they'd be being paid to be a organizer of a number of voices and that sort of thing. But I'd love to hear what Bunbury's doing, or anyone else for that matter, but I haven't heard of anyone else do it.
I'll share a little bit of it next week.
Good.
But
okay,
we want to then do a further, maybe just a 3-hour course on co-design and co-design panels.
Yeah.
But I think there's a lot more discussion there to be had. I mean, just the idea you were just presenting then, I think would be great to talk through a bit more. So maybe after this course, I'll get in touch with you and we can chat a bit more about it.
Yeah, I was part of the JFA Purple Orange Co-Design Council for 4 years, and we developed or contributed to development of that organisation's co-design policy, which is going to be published early next year, I think.
Oh, great.
It did a co-design launch in 1.0 back in 2022.
Yeah, I thought
This
they
is
put something out already. Yeah.
2.0. And then, of course, there's also Taxi that has co-design program and training.
I need to talk to you. I think you're going to teach me and tell me a lot more than I'm going to tell you. But let's set up a meeting for after this training and have a good chat about that. I'm sure Virginia, you'd like to be involved in that too. Maybe Karen, you might too.
Yeah,
because it's how we get voice.
It's bandied around a lot, but how it's
just like universal design.
And what do we mean by co-design, and how do we get a good balance? And like I've been involved in some co-design projects, but to be honest, the pool of people with disabilities is so small and so limited with their knowledge that I really don't think they've been a successful project. And you know, my experience tells me that you need a wider pool of talent, and also people who have educated themselves a little bit around all the aspects to do with.
Karen, I so believe you're right. I think that's what we should be pushing the federal and state governments to be doing in the Australia's Disability Strategy, is to actually provide the funding and the mechanisms to enable people to be able to do that. To create the pool.
100%. Yeah. 100%. Virginia, we need to talk more about that, because it could be an opportunity for us to move into that space too. You know, sort of looking at training and also facilitation of co-design potentially down the track. But
a variety of people learning how not to be dudded by fake co-design, you know, or no co-design at all.
That's the enemy of true co-design, isn't it? Yeah, you're quite right. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep. Look, thank you for listening to me so much. Lovely getting to meet you, Karen. That was some really useful insights.
Nice to meet you too.
Thanks, Michael. We'll see you next week.
Thanks, Michael.
Cheers.
Okay. Bye. Karen, did you want to stay on at all, or?
I'm going to need the slides again just to go through them, because I just do not retain memory.
No, that's fine.
I have written some notes. And things, but
Virginia can send them through to you, and you can think about what you.
In terms of how you feel at this point, did it feel like it was an interesting, like a good conversation? Do you think we generated some good discussion, or?
Yeah, I think the discussion was good, but I'm really keen to see the next bit, the meeting.
Yeah.
Yes.
So,
yes.
Yeah. Because I think, you know what I was going to say about, I didn't want to say it in front of anyone else, but when I did the Access Consultants course, I felt that was really mingy and not really generous with ideas, the sharing of ideas around what we mean by universal design and how we can move beyond the standards. And I felt like that Jo was protecting her
IP.
She's also an Access consultant, so you know, she's trying to protect her brand and her ideas. And it was like, oh, you research it. Well, there's a lot of people there that really needed the help to research it, and the ability. That's, you know, half the reason why they're doing the course is to build their knowledge base, and like good examples are really hard to find. I think one of the frustrating things that a lot of people with disability have is that they think that they've made progress, only to come about the next project and everything that was learned in the previous project goes out the window. You know, there's you know.
That's because those changes weren't embedded successfully.
Yeah.
In the,
Yeah,
in the
and then it's exactly
design
right.
process.
And it's like, my mind is that I think that it would almost be easier to embed them at the local government area than it would be in the state government area. I'm not sure if that works. I don't have as much knowledge around state government, but you know, like a simple thing like dog toileting area for assistance animals in the metro tunnel spaces. Like that's not a thing in the whole design thing, and yet there was a hard-fought battle to get them, and there was like announced at some of the stations, like, look at this, you know, amazing. And it's like, well, no one learned from that simple thing that could have made people, you know, a lot easier journey experience.
Absolutely.
And it's been overlooked in like multi-billion-dollar projects, and it's like, I don't even know how you would embed that at state government level, but it's also, it frustrates me beyond belief that there are people being paid by organisations who really don't do any work around improving their knowledge. You know, like it's like, oh, there's nothing around.
That's a good point.
You know,
I mean, really, everything you're saying right now is exactly what we'll touch on next week. Only there's not necessarily a hard and fast answer to some of the questions you're raising. It's more that they are the kind of issues that we need to try and address through, you know, through better training, through cultural change, through better systems. So yeah, this is definitely the sort of stuff we'll be covering or touching on at least next week.
Some of Michael's comments coming back, like, what?
Scully. I couldn't believe he used the climate emergency and the zero road toll examples. I was like, you've been involved in the universal design policy from the beginning. Obviously,
and was he talking to the other Michael when, like, Michael's feedback around their adaptive what was it? Their policy is like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. I can take that away and use that. Was he meaning Michael, or was he confusing Michael with Adam? I don't know. But I'm like, where
I'm
were
not sure.
you?
I haven't read all the chat comments.
Oh no, he said something around, oh, he was thanking Michael and really looking forward to example of using the so their guidelines for universal design, and how he said that, like, they're the 3 layers of it and stuff like that.